The Wooden Table. A work of fiction. All characters, institutions, and events depicted are invented and do not represent real people, companies, or occurrences. Oh, yeah. 7 people worth a combined $2 trillion sat around a plain wooden table inside a Roman rectory that had not been renovated since the 1960s. The man at the head of the table owned nothing, not a car, not a house, not a single share of stock, and by the end of the evening, he would be the only person in the room who had said anything anyone remembered. His name, chosen the year he was elected, was Pope Cassian II. Born Daniel Okafor in Detroit, the son of a factory foreman and a hospital orderly, he had spent 11 years as a missionary in the Peruvian highlands before returning to a diocese that was hemorrhaging both parishioners and jobs. He was the first American pope in the church's history, and in 14 months in office he had done something none of his predecessors had quite managed. He had made billionaires nervous. He had published an encyclical, Corpus et Machina, Body and Machine, arguing that a civilization which automated away the dignity of work without asking what came after was not progress but abandonment wearing progress's clothes. He had said in a homily that went viral for reasons the Vatican press office hadn't anticipated that a spreadsheet had never once fed a child. And now, the evening before an extraordinary assembly of his cardinals, he had done something his own aides called reckless. He had invited 7 of the most powerful technology and finance executives on Earth to a room with no press, no cameras, and no agenda they'd been told in advance. 2. The idea had started 3 weeks earlier over a plate of simple pasta with Cardinal Amati, the Vatican's Secretary of State. "I want them in the room," Cassian had said. "Not their spokespeople, not their foundations, them." Amati set down his fork. "Which ones, Holy Father?" "The ones reshaping the world faster than any government can respond. The ones building the machines that will decide who works and who doesn't." "You want to invite the wealthiest men and women alive to the Vatican." "I want to ask them a question," Cassian said, tearing a piece of bread slowly, "and I want to see whether any of them can answer it." Amati had spent 3 decades in Vatican diplomacy. He had brokered conversations between governments that officially refused to acknowledge each other's existence. Even he hesitated at this one. "Holy Father, these are not heads of state. They don't respond to moral pressure. They have entire departments whose only function is to deflect exactly this kind of conversation." "Then," Cassian said, "their departments are about to have a difficult evening." Then Drew. The invitations went out through back channels. Quiet phone calls, no letterhead, no press advisory. A private conversation with the Holy Father on matters of global concern. No agenda given. 5 accepted within a day. 1 took 2 days to confirm. The 7th, the most reclusive of the group, a founder who hadn't given an interview in over 3 years, accepted within the hour, which surprised Amati more than anything else about the whole affair. By evening, 7 private jets had landed at Fiumicino, though none of the companies would confirm it publicly until the story broke on its own. 4 of the attendees were American. 1 was based in Shenzhen, 1 in Bangalore, 1 in Paris. Between them, their companies' combined revenue exceeded the GDP of over 100 countries, and every one of them ran a company at the center of the race to replace human labor with artificial intelligence. The room chosen for the meeting had no throne, no gilding, a plain wooden table, 8 chairs, water, bread, olive oil, nothing else. The first executive arrived expecting grandeur and found austerity instead. His expression changed the moment he stepped through the door. By 6:05, all 7 were seated. 2 of them were rivals mid-lawsuit over a $9 billion patent dispute, seated 3 chairs apart, not speaking. 2 others checked their phones compulsively. 1 stared at the bread as if it might explain itself. The mood wasn't hostile. It was something harder for them to manage. Uncertainty. These were people who entered every room already knowing, from the data, how the conversation would end. This room had no data. IV. Cassian entered at 6:10 in a plain white cassock, no extra vestments, wearing only the ring of his office. He shook each hand firmly, briefly, and looked each person in the eye a half-second longer than was comfortable. One attendee would later say the handshake alone told him everything. No warmth, no coldness, just the unmistakable signal that this was not a courtesy call. He didn't open with a prayer. He opened with a number. 600 to 1, he said. That is the current ratio between what the average chief executive of a major corporation earns and what the average worker at that same company takes home. 60 years ago, it was 6 to 1. He let the silence sit. I didn't bring you here to lecture you. I brought you here because I believe you are intelligent people. And intelligent people, confronted with a moral question they cannot answer, will at least have the honesty to admit it. He turned to the man across from him, the head of a logistics company whose automated warehouses had eliminated 42,000 jobs in the past year alone. When you removed those positions from your supply chain, did anyone in your boardroom ask what happens to those 42,000 families? The executive mentioned retraining programs, transition funds. I've read about your retraining programs, Cassian said. 14% completion. That means 86 of every 100 people you displaced are somewhere right now trying to feed their families without the job you took from them. Your stock rose 11% that same quarter, 11% for your shareholders, 0 for their children. No one spoke. He stood and walked to the window. Rome was going gold in the evening light. He stood there with his back to the most powerful people in the room, and when he turned around, he said the sentence one attendee would later describe as the most uncomfortable thing he'd heard in his professional life. I grew up on the west side of Detroit. My father stood on a factory floor for 30 years. My mother emptied bedpans on the night shift. They were not wealthy, but they were never humiliated. They had work. They had a purpose. They came home tired, not broken. That is what you are taking from people. Not just income. Purpose. He returned to the table, placed both hands flat on the wood. I'm not asking you to stop building. The church is not the enemy of progress. But not one of you has answered a very simple question yet. What is your plan for the people you are making unnecessary? The silence lasted, by 2 separate accounts, nearly 30 seconds. An eternity for people whose companies moved at the speed of light. The executive from Bangalore spoke first about economic cycles, about how the Industrial Revolution had eventually created more jobs than it destroyed. Cassian nodded slightly. The Industrial Revolution took 80 years to play out. You are compressing the same disruption into 8. Do the people you've displaced have 80 years to wait? Their landlords won't. Their children's hunger won't. History may absolve you. The present will not. The executive from Paris cited his company's philanthropic arm, scholarships, education grants. Your company made $91 billion in profit last year, Cassian said quietly. Your foundation distributed $400 million, less than 0.5%. That isn't generosity. That's the management of public perception. 6. He turned to artificial intelligence directly, the subject of his encyclical. I signed that document because I believe we stand at a crossroads, not a technological one, a moral one. The question is not whether machines can think, it's whether we will still value the humans who can feel. He turned to one of the American executives. Your company announced last month that its new system can write legal briefs, diagnose illness, and manage portfolios without human intervention. You celebrated it. Your investors celebrated it. Did anyone ask what happens to the decades those lawyers and doctors spent training? The executive used the word augment 3 times. Cassian raised one hand almost gently. I hear that word often, from people in your position, but your earnings reports tell a different story. Every time you say augment, another department disappears. Words are not policy. Your policies are clear enough. It was no longer a meeting. It had become something closer to a reckoning. A room full of people who had never once been caught without an answer, and who could not, tonight, find solid ground. Then Cassian softened. "I didn't invite you here as enemies," he said. "I invited you because you hold more power to change this than almost anyone alive. A single decision from any one of you affects more lives than most legislation ever will. That isn't rhetoric, it's arithmetic. You have built extraordinary things. But building is not enough. You must ask what you're building on. If the foundation is other people's crushed opportunities, what you've built will not stand. Not because I say so, because eventually, people will." 7. The founder from Shenzhen, through the interpreter present but rarely needed, asked directly, "What would you have us do? Specifically?" Cassian answered without pause, as though he'd been waiting for exactly that question. 3 things. First, before any of you deploy a system that eliminates more than 5,000 jobs, conduct a full human impact assessment. Not a market analysis, a human one. And publish it before deployment, not after. Second, reinvest at least 5% of the savings generated by automation directly into the communities affected. Not through a foundation. Not as a tax write-off. Into the work machines cannot do. Caring for the elderly, raising children, rebuilding what's local. Third, stop telling the public that automation creates more jobs than it destroys, when your own internal projections say otherwise. I've spoken to your former employees. The data does not support the story you sell. And when you lie about the future you're building, you rob people of the chance to prepare for it. No one argued. That, perhaps, was the most remarkable part of the whole evening. These were not people accustomed to staying quiet. They had built empires by never once backing down, but against a man who owned nothing, wanted nothing from them, and had no board to answer to, they had no leverage, and without leverage, they had no language. 8. At 7:45, Cassian stood. The meeting was over. He shook each hand again. Same firmness, same eye contact. As the last executive reached the door, Cassian said one final thing. "The world is watching what you build, but it will eventually ask you why you built it." The executive stopped, turned, said nothing, and left. 9. By midnight, a journalist in San Francisco had posted flight tracking data showing 7 private jets landing at Fiumicino that afternoon. By morning, the meeting was confirmed. By the next day, it was the lead story on every major outlet on the planet. Labor unions praised it. Corporate spokespeople issued careful statements about productive exchanges of ideas. Markets got nervous. Tech stocks dipped across major exchanges, one company losing $14 billion in market capitalization within 6 hours, analysts arguing over whether a pope's private remarks constituted a moral appeal or something closer to a threat. The phrase "not one could answer" trended in dozens of countries within a day. Factory workers in Sao Paulo held up hand-painted signs outside corporate offices. Garment workers in Manila, replaced by automated cutting machines, staged a silent protest holding photographs of their families. Within a week, 3 of the 7 attendees made public announcements. One created an independent human impact review board with labor representatives and community leaders holding real seats at the table, the first of its kind in the industry. Another pledged $200 million for displaced workers, with a public commitment that no further automation would happen at the affected facilities until the fund was fully deployed and independently reviewed. The third delayed a major product rollout by 18 months to study its effects on employment, writing, in a statement that went viral in translation. Speed is not wisdom. Deployment without understanding is not progress. Critics pointed out the delay coincided with regulatory scrutiny already underway. Skeptics noted the fund represented less than a single day's profit. Whether these were genuine reckonings or calculated damage control probably sat somewhere in between. But something had shifted regardless. For the first time, the world's most powerful technology companies had been forced to answer a moral question instead of a market one. And the fact that they answered at all, however imperfectly, meant the question could no longer be waved off. X, That night, back in his apartments, one of his brothers in community asked Cassian how he felt. He sat down heavily. 14 months in office had aged him visibly. The long trip through West Africa in the spring, the encyclical, the endless audiences, and now this. "Did it work?" his brother asked. Cassian allowed a small, tired smile. "That depends what we mean by work. Did I change their minds tonight? Probably not. Did I make them uncomfortable? Absolutely. And sometimes discomfort is where change starts. You plant a seed of doubt in someone who has never doubted himself, and you've done something a regulation can't do." He walked to the window and looked out at the city, lit gold against the dark. "They'll forget most of what I said," he murmured. But they won't forget their own silence. The fact that they had every resource on earth at their disposal and still couldn't answer one simple question. What is your plan for the people? That silence will follow them, and one day it will get loud enough that they'll have to answer it. When it does, no one will be able to say they weren't warned.